Welcome to our sharing on St. John's Gospel. I left you in our last episode just beginning to look at the disciples coming to Jesus. And since the commentary on John will be flowing from one text to another, we'll just have to let it happen that way week by week. We're looking at the disciples coming to Jesus. And I want to pick up in John chapter 1 from verse 40. One of those two who became followers of Jesus after hearing what John said was Andrew. So Andrew is named. And he had a brother called Simon Peter. This is fascinating because at our very first introduction to Simon the fisherman, he's given his Peter title. And the reason for this is that the other three synoptic gospels are in circulation. It's the end of the first century. And so the only name by which Christians actually know this man is Peter. So they would recognize Simon Peter, but they mightn't recognize Simon the fisherman if they're living far away from Israel where it all happened. So John gives him his Peter title. So he was the brother of Simon Peter. So early next morning, Andrew met his brother and said to him, "We have found the Messiah." Now compare this with the people coming from the delegation of the Sanhedrin who have nothing but questions and no answers. These men are quite sure what they're actually dealing with, and they've made up their minds immediately that Jesus is the Messiah. So this means the Christ. And he, Andrew, took Simon to Jesus. Jesus looked hard at him and said, "You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas," meaning a rock. I want to stop there for a minute because the meeting between this fisherman and this apparent carpenter is the most important meeting that happened on this planet. It changed all history. Nobody looking at them, and certainly none of the leadership in Israel, would have paid the remotest attention. But God works in strange ways. And the meeting of these two men did, in fact, change history. And John tells you right at the very beginning here that Jesus looked hard at this man. That means he penetrated Simon Peter to the very core of his being. And you will be told at the end of chapter 2 that Jesus never needed to be told anything about any man. He could read what was in a person. And immediately he decided to give this man a new name, therefore a new mission. And you have to be reminded of what happened back in the book of Genesis in chapter 17, verse 5, when a man called Abram had been called to follow the Lord, and he became the father of all those who believe. And when his commitment to the Lord was confirmed, the Lord said to him, "You shall no longer be called Abram, you shall be called Abraham." And so he was confirmed in his new office of being the father of all those who believe. We have another incident in Genesis 32, verse 28, when we have Jacob, the grandson of Abraham. You have him struggling with the angel all night. And towards the morning, the angel said, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he replied. And the angel said, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, it will be Israel." We say Israel, because you have been strong against God. You shall prevail against men. So there's two examples where somebody vitally important to the whole salvation history of the human race was given a new name. But I want to emphasize the Jacob one because Jacob was the father of this nation, the founder, because it was his 12 sons who became the 12 tribes of Israel. And the amazing thing is that when you read the whole history of the Old Testament, you find they were strong against God. They did fight God every inch of the way. And it's going to be even more amazing to see that with God incarnate present, that the leadership of Jerusalem will be very strong against God, and they will fight him and they will kill Jesus. It's amazing. You shall be called Israel, because you have been strong against God, and you will prevail among men. So after this, we have another disciple coming to Jesus. And this is in verse 43. The next day, notice the next day, the next day, the next day. I'll deal with that in a minute. Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. And he met Philip, and he said, "Follow me." Now, he must have known Philip if he could just simply say straight up, "Follow me." And Philip came from a town called Bethsaida, as Andrew and Peter did. So they all knew each other. And Philip found Nathanael, a friend of his. Now, Philip and Nathanael is the Bartholomew of the apostles. And the two of them were the two oldest ones, and they were very close together. And they remained very close together all the time. He found Nathanael, and he said to him, "We have found the one that Moses spoke about in the law." That's your Deuteronomy 18:15-18, that Jesus is the prophet like Moses. "We found the one whom the prophets wrote about, that is the Messiah." And so the obvious thing is, what's his name? And he said, his name is Jesus, the son of Joseph, from Nazareth. That's Yeshua bar Yosef, from Nazareth. Now, it's very, very interesting that, first of all, the messianic titles, which John the Baptist said were not his. I'm not the prophet, I'm not this, I'm not that. They were all given to Jesus because Jesus was the person, okay? Now, why is Jesus called son of Joseph? In those days, a boy was called the son of his father. But a girl was called by either her father or husband. And if she didn't have a husband or a father, her brother. Like, for example, Martha in Bethany was called Martha of Lazarus. Lazarus was her brother. She was not married. Her parents were dead. Our Blessed Mother was called Mary of Joseph of Nazareth, because there would be Josephs all over the place. So she's identified as Mary of Joseph of Nazareth. So Jesus is called the son of Joseph because he was the head of that household. It doesn't mean that he was physically born from this man. It doesn't mean that. In the Irish tradition, we also have that. My Irish name is Ní Ógán. That means the daughter of Hogan. My brother is Mach Ógán. That is the son of Hogan. And we have even tribes in Ireland called the O's and the Macs, as we call them, because O means the daughter of, and then Mach means the son of. So Israel wasn't the only culture that actually used this type of name. Okay, and we're told that Simon Peter is the son of John. Okay, so that was his father's name. So this was the way they identified one another. So we have Nathanael, and we're going to have an interesting reaction from Nathanael. So once he hears that the name is Yeshua is Jesus, bar Yosef, from Nazareth. He said, from Nazareth. He said, can anything good come from that place? It's a wonderful, wonderful reaction that he gave. Obviously, Nazareth didn't have a wonderful reputation, whatever they were up to. But the thing is, John wants to tell us that all good came from Nazareth. Jesus came from Nazareth. Mary came from Nazareth. Joseph came from Nazareth. All good came from Nazareth. The Holy Family came from Nazareth. But he's telling you something else as well. And that is that God sees things differently to the rest of us. We may decide Nazareth hasn't got a good name, but that doesn't mean that God won't visit them, that God won't dwell among them. And our way of judging things is from below. His way of judging things is from above. And all of his children, whoever they are, whether they're blind, lame, crippled, or anything else, they're all his children, and he loves them all infinitely. Okay? So from Nazareth, he said. So Philip decided not to get into a discussion, and he said, come and see. Now, Jesus had said that to the first two. Come and experience this for yourself. Come and meet the Lord. Come and begin to penetrate the mystery of his person yourself, and then you will know. So as soon as Jesus saw Nathanael coming towards him, he said, there's an Israelite who deserves the name, incapable of deceit. Now, what on earth is Jesus actually referring to here? And that is, he's referring to Jacob, the founder of the nation of Israel, and he was known as a man of deceit. He had struggled with his brother Esau in his birth. He struggled with his father Isaac when his father was dying to try and get the birthright out of him and steal it from his brother. And he struggled with the angel all night. And Jacob needed a huge change of heart to really become a man of God. But there was no struggle in Nathanael. Nathanael did have this prejudice against Nazareth, but when he saw Jesus, that was it. He seemed to know instantly that he was dealing with the real thing. And so he deserved this affirmation and praise from Jesus. This was the only one of them that Jesus gave any praise to. There's an Israelite who deserves the name incapable of deceit. Nathanael said, how do you know me? And so he's engaging Nathanael at a deep level. If you can say about someone you're seeing for the first time that he's a real Israelite, it means you know him from within. Nathanael said, how do you come to know me? And Jesus gave an enigmatic reply. He said, I saw you under the fig tree. Now here's your first clue in John's Gospel, that when something seems to be sort of strange or not right or whatever, you're being told to dig deeper, much, much deeper. People go into all kinds of contortions trying to explain that Nathanael was doing something under a fig tree and Jesus saw him. That's actually not the point at all. The fig tree represents the house of Israel. It represents the whole people of Israel. And Jesus was saying to Nathanael, I, the Lord, have been taking care of you all down the centuries. I've been looking after you since the very beginning. I know all of you and I love you infinitely. I've been watching you under the fig tree. The fig tree was a symbol of the house of Israel. And that's why Nathanael gave him this extraordinary reply. Rabbi, he said, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. Very interesting. And Jesus replied, you believe that because I said I saw you under the fig tree? You'll see greater things than that. But let's come back to the King of Israel. It's very interesting. If you go back in history, where Jesus has been watching them under the fig tree all down the centuries, 900 years before that, the country had divided up into two kingdoms. And the northern kingdom was called the Kingdom of Israel, and the southern kingdom was called the Kingdom of Judah. Then they all failed God and broke the covenant, and the northern kingdom was sent off into Assyria, never came back. 10 tribes gone forever. There was only 2 tribes left, Benjamin and Judah. And then after they had sinned and broken the covenant to the point where there was no return, they were taken off into Babylon for 70 years. And some of them came back, not all of them. Some of them came back and they restarted the land. So by the time Jesus came, there was no king. There was no kingship. So why would Nathanael say, you are the King of Israel? Because that title means you are the king of this entire nation. You are the leader of this nation. You are the person appointed by God to lead this nation. Okay. So at the time when Jesus came, they had been dominated by a whole lot of nations up to now. And at the point where Jesus is speaking, they're under the domination of Rome, and they'd been under Greece and Persia and so on. We'll meet this again in chapter 8. And so their divisions at the moment were not political. The whole nation was one. They didn't realize they were one. And their divisions were more religious than anything else. The Galileans up there and the Samaritans over there and the Judeans over here. And the Judeans had the temple and they had the power. So it was this situation that Nathanael said, you will unite this entire nation and you will be its king. But the strange thing is that when Jesus was actually killed through the agency of the Sanhedrin, and he was actually crucified by Rome, Pilate insisted on putting a title over his head. Jesus of Nazareth is the King of the Jews, not the King of Israel. And the Sanhedrin reacted to this. Oh, don't say that, don't say that. Say, he says he was. But of course, Jesus never said he was. Jesus never said he was the king of anything. Pilate had specifically tortured Jesus and made an effigy of him as King of the Jews. He was literally insulting and humiliating the Judeans. The point is, Jesus was a Judean. In Ireland, if you are born in Dublin, we call you a Dub, because you were born there. If you're born in the territory of Judea, you're a Judean, and Jesus was born in Bethlehem in the land of Judea. So he was a Judean. And you'll find little points all throughout this gospel pointing out that Jesus actually was a Judean. They don't seem to realize it, and if they ever find out, they just don't accept it. So he was actually killed as the King of the Jews, but Nathanael said, "You are the King of Israel." Now, when you come to the book of Revelation, the other book written by John, which I've already quoted for you, when Jesus returns, he's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. He is not just the King of the Jews or the King of Israel. He is the King of all peoples. So then we come to this final piece here at the end of chapter 1. You will see greater things than that, Jesus said. And then he added, I tell you most solemnly, you will see the heavens laid open, and above the Son of Man, the angels of God ascending and descending. We're back to Jacob. Chapter 28 of the book of Genesis, Jacob is sleeping out in the open. He has a dream and he sees a ladder going between heaven and earth. And he sees the angels of God going up and down. In other words, whatever this ladder is, it's the communication between heaven and earth. And the angels are bringing that communication, this business between heaven and earth. And Jesus said he was that person. Everything was going to be through him, with him, and in him. He's the mediator. I don't think Jacob realized he was looking at a picture of a mediator when it was a ladder he was looking at. But Jesus said that he was the mediator between God and man. All business between the human race and God goes through him. So here we have a most wonderful testimony to who Jesus actually is. I want to give you a comparison between the creation account in Genesis and the new creation account in John chapter 1. So, Genesis chapter 1, John chapter 1. In Genesis chapter 1, on day 1, you're told that light and darkness are separated. On day 1 of St. John's account, that's chapter 1, verses 24 to 28, Jesus the light is separated from John, who represents the rest of us in the darkness of the world. So the Messiah and the precursor are clearly delineated. On day 2 in the book of Genesis, God divided the waters above from the waters below. So you've got heaven and earth separated. On day 2, in John's account, you have Jesus, the Lamb of God, is identified. He is the one who has come from above, and John the Baptist is the one from below. On day 3 in the book of Genesis, you have the oceans and the dry land, the seas and the earth. And you have the earth producing vegetation and all the rest of it, the first signs of life. So on day 3 in John's account, it's verses 35 to 39, you have John and Andrew coming to Jesus, the first signs of life in the recreation of the earth. On day 4 in the book of Genesis, you have the lights of heaven and the stars, and you have 2 great lights, one to govern the day and the other to govern the night. So when you come to day 4 in John's account, you have the 2 great lights are actually shown to us. Jesus is the sun. He is the one who governs the day of redemption. And Peter is the moon. He is the one who governs the church through the night of history. He and his descendants. okay? So the day and the night are separated. Now, day 5 in the book of Genesis, you have the fruitfulness of the waters with fish, the fruitfulness of the skies in the birds, and the fruitfulness of the earth in the animals and the plants. Day 5 for John, that's verses 43 to 51 of chapter 1. You have Philip and Nathanael, disciples coming to Jesus. He picks up more disciples, and so the kingdom is becoming more fruitful. So when you come to day 6 on the book of Genesis, you've got the creation of mankind. You come to day 6 in John's account, and there's no day 6. He omits day 6. Why is that? Because the entire gospel is the recreation of man who was destroyed in the fall. So day 6 is missing. Day 7 in the Genesis account is the Shabbat, the day when God rested after the labor of his creation. When you come to John's account, day 7 is at the other end of the gospel, when Jesus rests in the tomb on the great Sabbath after the terrible labor of his redemption. What you're being shown here is there is the creation and there is the recreation. There you have the loss of paradise, and here you're having paradise regained. And John wants to tell you, and he does it in this absolutely magnificent way, he wants to tell you that all that was destroyed is being renewed. And I'm going to stop there for this particular time, and we'll take it up from here in our next episode. Slán agus beannacht dé live. Goodbye. God bless you.